Welcome along to the podcast. Today, my guest is Mr. Louie Shelton. Before we get into Louie Shelton's musical life, here's a quick look at some of the artists where Louie was either the session guitarist on their recordings or the producer of their records. Boz Scaggs, the Monkees, Lionel Richie, Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5, Joe Cocker, James Brown, Glenn Campbell, Gladys Knight and the Pips, England Dan and John Ford Coley, Diana Ross, The Carpenters, Barbra Streisand, Art Garfunkel, Whitney Houston, Wayne Newton, The Partridge Family, The Mamas and the Papas, Stevie Wonder, Seals and Croft, Neil Diamond, Marvin Gaye, Kenny Rogers, Andy Williams, Quincy Jones, Ringo Starr, Michael McDonald, Sarah Vaughan, Sammy Davis Jr., and even T-Bone Walker, among many, many others. Louie has also recorded many albums under his own name. When did you start playing, Louie?
Professionally in 53.
53, so just almost around when the Telecaster was born.
That's right, I had one of the first ones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wish I still had it.
Yeah, they'd be worth a fortune now.
It would be. Unfortunately, saw Chuck Berry with his Gibson, the blonde Gibson with the gold hardware, the 350T, and I traded my Telly in on that one.
Oh, wow.
Because I could only afford one guitar.
Would have been an amazing thing seeing him play. Back then, I would imagine a groundbreaking, life-changing guitar player.
Very much so. I mean, between him and Elvis and Little Richard and those guys, they ushered in the rock and roll. But Chuck Berry, for rock and roll guitar, he was king.
Wow.
I figure I just tell all my students, if you learn to play Johnny B. Good, then you can play rock and roll.
It's a funny one. I remember being quite young and thinking, oh, that's a really easy thing to play. And then you sit down to learn it. That opening run, if played properly, that's quite difficult.
Yeah, it is. And I remember seeing a video of him with Keith Richards trying to play one of his solos, and he kept saying, "No, man, you bend it up. You don't bend it down," or something like that. He wouldn't let him get away with,
wow,
a bad take on his solo.
So, how old were you when you saw Chuck Berry?
I would have been 14.
And then were you playing gigs around that time?
At that time, I was starting to play some club gigs.
Wow.
Before that, I was playing mostly country because my first idol was Chet Atkins.
Oh, wow.
Which so many of the guitar players, he was their god. Yeah, George Harrison and all of those guys, they worship Chet Atkins. And
if there was a Chet Atkins tune that you would recommend players and other people to go and listen to, what Chet Atkins tune would you recommend?
Oh, there's so many of them. As a matter of fact, I was talking to our friend Aaron West yesterday, and he's doing some music for some project, and they wanted the inspiration to come from a Chet Atkins tune called Country Gentleman, which was the very first Chet Atkins piece I learned.
Oh, wow.
And I amazed him because he didn't have a clue how it went.
Oh, wow.
And I said, it goes like this. But that intro.
I've heard the track.
Yeah.
But it's sort of funny in my head. I'm thinking can't think of anything Chet Atkins. Then you play that, and it's like, of course. That's
yeah. I mean, that man played such a wide. He played everything from the most hillbilly kind of stuff to Bach. you know, classical music, literally.
So he was a very diverse player.
Oh man, he was, and I don't think he didn't really read music. I asked him one time. I said, "If you don't read music, how did you come up with that Bach stuff?" You know?
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I knew enough to get by. You know, I read enough to get by.
Wow.
You know."
So
But he inspired so many guitar players. So.
yes, he did. So you're 14 and you're playing gigs and you've seen Chuck Berry and Chet Atkins.
Well, the
was a big
first one I
influence.
saw was Elvis.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he came to my high school. We had some mutual friends, Jim Ed and Maxine Brown. They lived in Pine Bluff, which is a little town where I was staying for a couple of years, playing in a country band.
Yeah.
And going to school there. And he played at my junior high auditorium.
Wow.
I think I was 13 and he was 19. But that's where I saw Scotty Moore and Bill Black. Yeah, it was before Elvis had a drummer.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so his very first record had just come out.
I know of Scotty Moore, but I haven't heard the name Bill Black.
Bill Black was his bass player. He played the upright bass.
Oh wow.
And he actually became an artist himself with the Bill Black combo. They had some hit records out.
Wow.
Yeah, they did. Reggie Young ended up playing in that band for a while. Reggie's a Nashville, well, originally from Memphis, but a Nashville session player.
Okay.
And Reggie and I grew up together in
So
Little Rock.
you're 14 and doing gigs. Where does school fit into?
Well, at 14, I was only doing a Wednesday and a Saturday night job in a club.
Okay.
So
and then school through
yeah,
the week.
oh yeah, I was going to school.
Wow.
When I was 12, I was living with this family, Shelby Cooper and his wife Sarah Jane, and then she played fiddle, he played acoustic guitar and sang, and her brother played upright bass, and they hired me to play lead guitar. And so I would go to school during the day and then come home and pre-record the show for the next morning.
Oh wow.
But during the school break, when I wasn't going to school, we would actually go into the radio station and play live to air with one mic in the room.
Wow. And get the balance right.
All of us, yeah, gather. And we also did a TV show that way every Wednesday night. One microphone, I guess. So.
Yeah.
When
I mean,
TV first started.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of, particularly early American black and white, and the sound, they always seem to get the mix really quite good.
I mean, you go back and listen to those early, you know, Frank Sinatra records and all of that before we had multi-track recording, and man, you can hear everything.
Yeah.
It was they were so good, those
So
recording engineers.
if you were in a room, so I imagine you would have been in those big rooms with an orchestra, with a singer. I guess that's all about positioning and...
Well, yeah, by the time I got into doing sessions, obviously we had multi-tracks and everyone had their own mic and all that kind of stuff.
okay.
But in the early days before multi-track recording, when they only had one track,
Wow.
you know, it's still, you listen to those records.
Because there was such a thing back then too as direct to disc. Did they actually go, like, was it straight to vinyl? Like,
Oh, yeah,
skip the whole process of tape?
Yeah, the mastering lab there in LA did a bunch of records like that. Yeah,
Wow.
where the bands go straight to the vinyl.
Yeah, full
Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah, yeah. I never, fortunately, I never had to do any of that, you know.
Just a quick interruption to say thank you for watching the podcast. Please hit the subscribe button. It's very early days for us and we're trying to grow things, and you can help. Please share, hit the subscribe button. It makes a massive difference. Thank you very much. Let's revise where we're at. So you're 14 and you're doing some gigs, but you're still going to school. When you were doing gigs, was it original material? Was it covers, or how did that work for you?
Oh, during those days, it was always covers.
Okay.
Yeah, all of the, you know, all the rock and roll tunes, all the Chuck Berry, the Little Richard stuff, the Elvis stuff.
Is that a really good grounding for learning how to play your instrument, playing covers?
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, especially from the standpoint of the physical benefit you get from playing. But that doesn't mean that when you go home you can't listen to Wes Montgomery and you know,
Yeah.
and these other great players, which is what I did.
Yeah.
Which had nothing to do with the Wednesday, Saturday night rock and roll gigs, but I'm learning this other jazz chords, and adult chords, as they say, and listening to these other great players. And
How did you find out about people like Wes Montgomery? How did that filter into your life?
well, I'm from Arkansas, which is very deep south, and there wasn't a lot of jazz back there. You know, it was mostly country and rock and roll and blues and all that kind of R&B. But my friend Reggie Young from Memphis, who was a little bit older than me, he came to Little Rock and we played a lot of things together. And he told me about Johnny Smith and Barney Castle and Wes Montgomery. And of course I went out and bought their records, and it just opened up a whole new world for me, because I've always been so interested in guitar, you know. I mean, I just loved it since I was 3 years old, as far as back as I can remember.
Wow.
And so I always listened for the guitar part on a record. I always thought the singing, just, you know, get out of the way and let the guitar play, you know. But yes, that's how I got turned on to these other great guitar players.
Okay.
I would get any guitar record I came across, if it was flamenco or classical.
Bit of Paco Peña
Eventually,
and
yeah. Sabicas, Carlos Montoya. Yeah, I have all of
did
those.
Django Reinhardt filter in there as well?
Oh yeah, I've got Django's stuff too as well. He was a big inspiration for so many people too, even Chet Atkins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, he was a great player. But yeah, I got his stuff as well.
There's all these different influences, and you're playing and you're listening to different things, playing a bit of rock and roll, playing a bit of country. So when you left school, what happened for you from there?
When I left school, I went to doing 6-night-a-week club gigs for a few years.
Wow. Is that in Arkansas?
I left Arkansas and went to Santa Fe, New Mexico on a gig that was pre-booked with another fellow musician. And so we played the clubs in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, Denver, and a lot of other cities in the Southwest, 6-night-a-week club gigs.
Wow.
And but over the course of those few years, I was in several different kind of gigs. Sometimes I'd get to play more of a jazz gig where we were doing standards. And so I was able to kind of hone those skills a little bit, but most of it was just cover pop music kind of stuff. And at some point, I was good friends with Glenn because we were in Albuquerque together before he went out and became
Glenn Campbell?
Yeah, a superstar. And so Glenn went out there a couple of years before I did. And his drummer, when Glenn went out there, his drummer joined my band.
Okay.
And so a couple of years later, we decided to go out to LA. And the only person we knew was Glenn Campbell.
Oh, okay.
And at that point, he was still just doing sessions.
Because I guess a lot of people wouldn't know that. I mean, he's very famous for Wichita Lineman and as a great songwriter. I guess a lot of people wouldn't know that he's actually an incredible guitar player.
He is.
And he would have started out as a session guitarist.
Yeah, when he went out there, he traveled a little bit with the Beach Boys and the Champs.
Okay.
And but he pretty much then settled into doing sessions, and he would do the sessions with people like Dean Martin and some Beach Boys stuff, but Frank Sinatra, and people like Frank Sinatra and those guys. They loved Glenn because he was such a great personality. Yeah, they just loved having him on the date. Fun guy to be around, you know. So you're having a good time if Glenn's there.
Oh, cool. Is that because I know that you went on to do session stuff, lots of session work. Was being great to be around part of the equation of getting work?
If not, at least if they didn't like you, it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
If the guys that are already in there, if you didn't appeal
click.
to them the right way, you wouldn't be on many sessions after that because, in the days of Hal Blaine and Tommy Tedesco and all of that, you had to have, I guess, acceptance and to not be like come off like a bragging about
Not too arrogant.
overplaying and all that kind of stuff.
You want to be confident but humble.
Yeah, it was definitely a clique to where personalities had to mix up. Yeah.
I know that you've spoken about Tommy Tedesco. He was obviously big on the session scene before you came along.
Well, my first experience, my first meeting with Tommy was kind of funny because I had done a session with one of the other session guitar players that had replaced Glenn when Glenn left the scene to became an artist. And that player, who I won't mention his name, told me that any time we're playing together, I play rhythm and he plays the leads.
Okay.
So he introduced me to Tommy, and he said, "Hey, Tommy, this is Louie, blah, 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 and we have an agreement. I play the leads and Louie plays the rhythm." And Tommy said, "Oh, okay." And about 1 minute later, the producer came out in front of us and said, "Oh, guys, I want Louie to play all the leads." and anyone that knows Tommy knows that this poor guy, he never stopped nailing about that, Oh,
wow.
Oh, you play the leads and Louie plays rhythm. Oh, that didn't last very long. But
Because there's a lot of famous stories too about Tommy Tedesco and his legendary gambling.
Yeah, that was.
I mean, Steve Lukather has told a few about how he used to try and gamble with the guys about how much they're.
He would gamble about anything, As a matter of fact, in his spare time, when he played golf and played cards at the golf place, I heard a lot of stories about his wild gambling. I never experienced any of it myself, but by the time I started playing with Tommy, I was a different player than Tommy, obviously.
Stylistically much
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
And he was happy to not have to worry about the lead stuff and play rhythm guitar, He was...
Was that stuff that you were doing then, was that all reading?
No reading.
No reading?
Never. They never wrote guitar parts.
So you were basically...
It just...
what make your own chord chart and then just...
Well, we had a chord chart. We
Yep.
had a chord chart. We usually always had a chord chart.
Yep.
If not, we'd listen to their demo and write one out. You
Okay.
know? But no, they brought guys like myself in because we're supposed to know what to fill and what kind of sound to get. The arrangers on the sessions, they were classically trained to write for strings and horns and keyboards and bass.
Yes.
But because there was such versatility in the lead guitar as far as what kind of sound we get, what style we play, and most of us grew up not reading, most of us, unless you were a jazz player. And then, like they had Howard Roberts and Barney Kessel and Tommy to do that stuff.
Yes.
To read any notes, they could do that. But for a pop record, they wanted people that have done that, that knew how to relate to a song in that way, to bring something to the record that would make it a hit. I mean, when you go back and listen to all of the stuff that Steve Cropper would bring to a record, it became part of the record.
Okay,
The stuff Scotty Moore did with Elvis, it was featured in there. You don't get much of that today. There's hardly any guitar solos on records anymore.
Yeah.
Even if you hear a guitar, you rarely even hear a guitar.
In the 90s, there was a real it became, I specifically remember it. because I was out playing live gigs, and there was Nirvana had come out, and there that it was like almost that punk element, but there was very much an anti-guitar solo thing in pop music at the time.
Yeah.
And it's never really come back since then.
No, it hasn't. It's almost like, no, that's a wasted space, and we only want a 3.5-minute record, and the guitar takes it. But also, production is so different, with programming and more of the, when disco came in too, that kind of, the only thing you could hear would be the rhythm guitar chinking away on the dance stuff. But yeah, the solos just went away pretty much.
I guess they're probably still all there in other genres, but not necessarily stuff that's getting played on radio.
Yeah.
You got into the recording scene and the session scene through Glenn Campbell. How did you, because I know you were part of the Wrecking Crew and you got to play some amazing stuff.
Well, before I got in, I was doing demos for publishing company, for writers were signed to publishing companies, and they would go in and demo their songs to try to get other people to record those songs. And a couple of those writers was Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart. And so I played on all of their demos, and then they came across this deal to write and produce music for the Monkees. And they really liked my playing and asked me to come play on their stuff. And the first tune we recorded was The Last Train to Clarksville.
Oh, the first tune.
And it became a big hit.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the producers needed to start calling the guy that played on The Last Train to Clarksville. And
it's a new sound, and they're looking to reproduce that hit.
the guys that were doing the sessions every day, they weren't coming out with those kind of licks, those session guys. They were just mostly rhythm players.
Do you know where that came from for you? Was it just...
It's the way I've always played. If I'm playing with a singer, now I look for a place to do the fill, or
Okay, yep.
or if I have to do the intro, or if I have to do the solo. To me, that was just part of the job. And so when I was able to go in there and make records, I thought, oh, well, here's my chance to throw something in there and see if it sticks,
Yeah.
And before you know it, all the producers started calling me, and I was in,
So if we go back to something like Last Train to Clarksville, how did like a session like that go down? Was that the part that you ended up playing? Was it a short period of time or a long period of time to come up with that?
On that particular tune, Boyce and Hart had us come to a rehearsal hall and work that tune up.
Okay, so you'd spend time doing it in rehearsal.
As soon as they ran they didn't even have the whole song written. They say, we're looking for an idea for the single that sounds Beatles-ish, or whatever.
Oh, okay.
And they played a little bit of what they had as far as the start. And that idea for that intro just popped into my head. And I said, how about this? And it was as simple as that. And then we went into the big RCA studio to record it. And I don't remember us doing a lot of takes. All I remember is they kept telling me to turn my amp up louder on the Last Train to Clarksville. And I thought...
so was that multi-tracked, or was that...
that was probably 8-track at
Okay.
the time.
But turn your guitar up?
Yeah, turn my guitar up. They loved that sound of that telly and that bright the back pickup, And but no, there weren't many takes on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now you're getting lots of session work. So how did the Wrecking Crew thing and working with the Jacksons, how did that come about?
Well, every situation was different. Like my situation with the Carpenters was my connection with Joe Osborne, who played... I first met Joe when I went out to L.A. He was doing the Ricky Nelson show, the TV show.
Yep.
And Glenn introduced me to Joe. And he knew that Richard and Karen Carpenter when they were kids, before they had a record deal. And so we went into his little home studio, which was a 2-track. and recorded with Karen and Richard their demos.
Wow.
And Karen played drums.
Yeah.
And sang.
And they wrote great songs too.
Yeah. So that was like a whole separate gig. So now I got the Carpenters gig. So
did you play on the Carpenters recordings?
yeah. Well, I played on Close to You and We've Only Just Begun.
Oh, wow.
Top of the World.
Oh, wow.
A lot of their big hits.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of them. So I'm doing all of the Monkees stuff. Now I got the Carpenter stuff. And now Motown has moved out to LA, and they asked me to come over and do the Jackson 5. And so now I've got the Motown gig. And now the Partridge Family started up, and
wow.
they call me, and there's another gig every week. So it's all just situations. And then you got Neil Diamond that's doing an album. He wants you for 2 weeks. So it would just go from one thing to another.
You're doing all of the recording stuff as a session player in studio.
Uh-huh.
Did you ever get offered to go and tour and play live?
I did.
With those acts?
The one thing you didn't do to be a session player is leave town.
Because you'd lose your spot.
Yeah, someone else would get in. For example, the drummer that played on I Want You Back, which became a big hit, went on the road with Diana Ross, and I never saw him again on a session because they forgot about him, you know. And he could have stayed there and really kicked in on the session work. When I first went to LA, I did a bit of traveling, and I was wanting to do the session work, and at some point I decided, no, if I want to do session work, I've got to be here. You know, you got to be here. Because the guys that put sessions together, there's a lot of phone calls and a lot of organizing players.
So you just want to rely on someone to be
and
there.
They like to know that if I call Louie Shelton and he's available, he's in town, and we can get him.
Yeah.
So that was a very important decision on my part, to stay in town.
With session stuff, you got the chance to really play with, of that era, all of the best artists coming out of LA.
Yeah, and people that I had listened to growing up, Brown, what's his name?
James Brown.
James Brown. I mean, just to be in the room with him, you know, after admiring him for all those years, it was a thrill. I get to play with people like Ella Fitzgerald.
Wow.
Even Johnny Mathis, you know. I mean, I was a teenager when he was having hits, you know, A Certain Smile and all that stuff. And yeah, and he's still going, you know. Johnny Mathis is still going. He's a great singer. But that was always special, to work with someone that you had admired for years.
So when I first met you, I do remember you'd said, I've played on a few records here and there. And one of the ones that you mentioned was Silk Degrees by Boz Scaggs, which was one of my favourite all time.
I'd only heard about him the first time when I was up at San Francisco visiting my sister, and we were thumbing through a record store, and she came across one of his early records, and she said, have you ever heard of this guy? He's really popular up here. And I said, no, we'd never heard of him. And so about a year later, I get a call from David Page from Toto saying, we're doing a record with this guy, Boz Scaggs. You want to come do it with us? And I said, sure. And that's how that all happened. Just me and Hungate and Picaro and David.
Was Toto a thing at that particular point?
No.
They were just doing the...
That was the thing that got them their record deal.
Oh.
Yeah. That was...
Did Steve Lukather play on that as well? Or just...
No.
Was there another guitar player with you?
No.
So it's just you, basically just doing the guitars?
Just the four of us, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, on some of the other sessions, there were other guitar players.
Oh, okay.
But I think I played on about 5 tracks on that album. But on Lowdown, it was just me on there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, great songs.
And incredibly good musicians.
Yeah.
It must have been an amazing thing to play with, particularly Jeff Porcaro playing drums.
Yeah, well, we had used Jeff when they first started, because I knew them since they were teenagers. And I used
Because you worked with their dad?
Yeah, their dad was the conductor on the Campbell Show, and
Oh,
he
okay.
also did the strings for our Seals and Crofts records, Hummingbird and all of that.
Because you worked quite extensively with Seals and Croft too.
Yeah, I produced all their stuff, yeah. As a matter of fact, I was doing the Partridge Family, and I had done this first album for Warner Brothers with Seals and Crofts, not expecting anything. And I go down to do the session with the Partridge Family, and their producer, Wes Farrell, said, man, I was in Palm Springs over the weekend, and he said, they kept playing this Seals and Crofts records, Summer Breeze. He said, man, you got a hit on your hands. And I couldn't believe it, you know. But it ended up being a good single for them.
Yeah. And how did it come about, the transition from being, say, just a session guitarist to being a producer?
Well, I had to cut out a lot of my session work because there was a lot of pre-production doing the Seals and Crofts albums. At first, I tried to do a lot of both, and I found out that my production was suffering because so much of my time was doing other sessions. And so I cut it way down as far as doing sessions for other people. But occasionally I'd get a call for someone, like if they said, we're doing a Joe Cocker record, you want to come? And then, since I'd never worked with him, I'd say, yeah, you know. There'd be the special things that came up that I wouldn't turn down because they were just too much fun, you know.
Because you would have worked with some great producers as well. What would you say is the key to being a good producer?
You have to have an ear for songs and the structure, and you have to have a great team, you have to have a great engineer, and you have to have a good knowledge of what musicians work together, what rhythm sections work together, and all those elements that come into producing, you know, identifying which songs are right for the artist, making sure that they're not too long, and you know, all that kind of stuff. A little bit of songwriting helps, you know.
When you were producing, were you working for the artist or working for the record label? How does that? What was the power dynamics between that?
I'm working for the artist, but you're paid by the record company.
So did you ever have record company pressure to push you in a certain direction or do things a certain way?
Not really. As a matter of fact, my first production was with A&M, which is Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss's company. And the way that happened is England Dan and John Ford Coley had come out to LA from Texas, and they brought a cassette and was shopping to get a record deal. And their manager told me, well, they're getting ready to go back to Texas because no one's interested in their stuff.
Okay.
I said, really? I said, well, I'm working with Herb Alpert tomorrow. Let me grab the cassette and I'll have him give it a listen. So I took the cassette and I gave it to Herb. He took it home that night, and the next morning when I ran on to him, I said, did you get a chance to listen to the tape? He said, yeah. He said, I like it, and I want you to produce it.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, and that's just unbelievable. That's the way I started producing. And
so you obviously had faith in your ability to be able to do it.
yeah, he did, because Leon Russell and some other musicians had started producing, and he thought musicians should have a clue about producing, you know. I did their basic tracks, and then I said, okay, now we're going to go put some strings on it. And we did the strings one night, and I saw Herb the next morning. He said, how'd the strings go? And I said, yeah, I think they went well. He said, well, if you're not happy with them, do it again. So I just really had carte blanche as far as the budget, you know.
Yeah.
They were so nice to work for. So I never got into budget trouble, as some producers did. I mean, I worked with some producers that went way, way over budget, and it didn't go down very well with the artist because, in the end, the artist has to pay for it.
Yeah.
They have to sell that many records to pay back all of that money that went into production.
Yeah, because I can remember reading about budgets for bands recording in the 80s, and it was seemingly ridiculous amounts of money. And bands would spend 3 months, 6 months recording an album. I mean, looking back from where we are now, that does seem quite decadent.
Well, I've heard stories of bands getting their record deal, showing up at the session in a limo, catering in French food, and all of this stuff, and they don't realize it's their money, their future earnings that they're spending. They think it's the record company's money, but no, the record company will get all that back before you ever get a dime.
The record company's just acting like a bank.
Yeah.
I know Seals and Crofts, there was, 12 albums?
Yeah.
So that was you had quite a long relationship with them.
That was my main production career. I did an Art Garfunkel album. I did 2 England Dan John Ford Coley albums. And I did an artist for Columbia called Jane Oliver, who was a beautiful singer, and a lot of other different artists. I was supposed to do Jim Croce, and he passed away. But I had already been involved with the record company to produce his next album. And then going further back, Sony called me up to produce a Ricky Nelson album.
Oh, wow.
And then he goes down in a plane crash or something. But my main production career was Seals and Crofts, because I was so involved with those guys, you know.
So 12 albums, like how often would they do an album?
They were spread out because sometimes they would get like a 2-week tour right in the middle of an album, which I never did like. But but when the tours came in, they would do them, and then.
Did the players that were playing live in their touring band, did they play on the recordings?
No, I always used session players, guys that I'd worked with in LA, you know.
Was that a normal thing where artists would have a touring band which was different from the band that played on the records?
Yeah, the touring bands rarely played on the records.
Okay.
The artist would come into town, and the producer had his musicians. You know, like a David Foster. He would even have session players play on Chicago's records. You know what I mean? Or obviously, session players played on the Beach Boys stuff for the most part, which is a self-contained band, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't do it if it's a Led Zeppelin or something like that, but most of the touring artists, they had their road band, and then the recording they would leave up to the producer. One
of my favourite guitar players is Steve Lukather. Did you ever get to work with Steve?
I never worked with him. We're good friends.
Another one of my favourite players, who I know you did get a chance to work with, is Larry Carlton.
Well, yeah, I did get to work with Larry, which was a lot of fun. Since Larry was very young, you know, I got him on the Partridge Family sessions.
So how old would he have been? Was that when he was starting out?
Yeah, he was first starting out. Probably his early 20s.
Wow.
Yeah, early 20s. I had seen him play in an after-hours club with just him and a singer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I think the singer probably played rhythm guitar. And Larry was playing a 175 Gibson.
Okay.
And playing some B.B. King and all that kind of stuff. And so when David Cassidy asked me if I knew of another guitar player, I said, yeah, I know someone that could probably cut this Partridge Family stuff pretty well.
Oh, cool.
And Larry and I, we got along really well doing sessions. There was no competition or anything. I wanted to hear him play, and he wanted to hear me play. And instead of us arguing over who was going to play the leads, I wanted him to play, and he wanted me to play. So we would switch back and forth. They'd say, "Okay, you take this one, and I'll take the next tune."
Oh, cool.
So that was a lot of fun. Yeah.
I know that I've got a couple of albums that you've recorded of your own material.
I just decided to start doing that when I was in Sydney, and I recorded my first album there, and I had some great players, Chad Wackerman and David Jones, Leon Gare, really some good players. And I was able to secure a record deal with a company in New York.
Okay.
And they distributed it. I don't know if it was worldwide, but I know in America they distributed it.
When were you in Sydney? That would have been, what, 90s?
That was from 84 to 96, I believe.
Okay, so it's a good stint in Sydney?
Yeah, 12.
Did you really enjoy Sydney?
I did. Loved it. We had only planned to stay there for 5 years, but we ended up staying 12. And we went back to the States shortly after I had done that record. And so I was in Walmart one night, and you know, they're open all night, so you can go there at midnight if you want to. I came up, it was about 11 o'clock. I got in my car, and the radio's on, and I hear this tune. And I'm thinking, I know it's my tune, and I don't have a cassette in the car. What the hell's going on here? And it was my tune getting played on the radio.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because at the time they had a really good jazz station in Nashville, and those stations, they were a network of stations all across the country. So if you were on one station, you're on 30 others across the country.
Okay. So what sort of style of stuff would you describe your original stuff? Would you call it jazz?
It was kind of fusion.
Yeah.
And the one tune that I'm hearing on the radio was the tune that I didn't want to put on the album because it was just a groovy little, thing, but it was a smooth jazz kind of thing, and they loved it on there. And the one tune I didn't want on the album is the one that gets played on the radio.
Okay, so you spent quite a long time in Sydney, and then you went back to the US, and I'd imagine you moved back to Nashville.
Yeah, we moved to Nashville.
Had you ever lived in Nashville before?
No, but we had a look at Nashville before we moved to Sydney.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel right at the time. So, I mean, because I grew up back in that part of the country.
Yeah.
Nashville was still a lot country music at that point, and I wasn't country, I mean, I could do country, but I was more versatile,
Yes.
I was working with some guys from Sydney. They were in a band I was producing in LA. They kept saying, "Man, you would love Sydney. You would love Australia, man. If you love golf and fishing and stuff, man." So we finally wanting to get out of LA, like a lot of people, and we went down and we spent 5 weeks there in Sydney. And during that time, I met with a lot of record companies and all of that, and they said, "Yeah, man, come on down." And so we went down there and ended up really, really loving it. But at some point, we, because of family, our family's getting older, and my wife's mom's getting older, and my sisters and all of that, and we figured we should go back and spend some time with them. Yeah.
So how long did you spend in Nashville?
10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I set up my studio there. My brother-in-law had a studio. We originally had our studio in LA together.
Okay, you and your brother-in-law?
Yeah, in Sills and Crofts.
Okay.
And at some point, we went in separate ways, and he took the studio to Nashville. So he had a big complex there, and when I went, I set up my studio in one of his rooms.
Oh, okay.
And it was really, really nice. Nashville's changed so much. All of those places now down around Music Row are big hotels. They've torn down that studio You know, we were in the old Warner Brothers building, and they built a new one. But I still have a lot of family in Nashville. So when I go back to the States, I spend most of my time in Nashville.
Because it's become the large music hub in the US now, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of great musicians there. And yeah, it's got everything. It's people that live there are a bit pissed off because it's getting so crowded. Traffic, and everyone wants to move there.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy. Yeah, but it's one of the best places. I think it's one of the best towns in America to live in.
You've finished up in Nashville, and you've decided to move back to Australia.
Yeah. My son and one of my daughters grew up here. They graduated in Sydney.
Yep.
And my son married his childhood sweetheart. And so when they started having kids, they wanted to raise them in Australia. That son and that daughter were 11 and 12 when we moved to Australia.
So they obviously love it, and they love it here. And
Oh
why
yeah,
wouldn't you?
oh yeah. I mean,
It's a great place to live.
Oh yeah, they live here on the Gold Coast now.
Oh, okay.
And we have 4 grandchildren here. But most of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren are in Nashville and California.
Okay, because I know you go over there and visit every now and then.
Oh yeah, I've got 2 daughters in California and 1 in Nashville. And most of my wife's family is in Nashville now. Because we were all kind of family with Sills and Crofts. And Crofts married my wife's sister.
Okay.
And so we've got all of that and all of their kids and cousins and nephews and nieces.
We're out sitting in my big live room.
A great room. We just did 15 horns in here night before last.
I was just going to say, so two nights ago.
Yeah.
We were in here with there's a 10-piece horn section, 15-piece band for a young 18-year-old singer named Charlie Mitchell.
Uh-huh.
My question to you would be, what sort of advice do you give someone like Charlie Mitchell on how to navigate the way the music industry is right now?
I think he knows as well as I do that it's all about the social media these days, getting your stuff on YouTube and on the different platforms. Record deals are far and few between anymore.
Is it worth anyone actually signing a record deal these days?
That I don't really understand. There's certain people, like the Dua Lipas and the Katy Perrys and all of these people that have big budgets and make great records and videos, but how many do the record companies sign? It used to be the record companies had a lot of artists on their label. I mean, when I was doing sessions, A&M would have 80 artists on their label.
Yeah.
And there was a point where they started cutting off anyone that was selling 250,000 records. They didn't want to know about it.
It's not enough.
They wanted a $40 million Michael Jackson record. And so they just, they cut away all of the lower selling artists. And it's even worse now. So, I mean, it's so bad that as far as trying to get a record deal, and the deals that you get, they want some of your live performance and your publishing and arm and a leg to go with it.
Yeah, well, I guess they're not selling physical units like they used to. I wonder if they're selling physical units at all.
Yeah, well...
Obviously, there's some money in streaming.
Yeah.
And the artist doesn't seem to see much of that, so I would imagine a large chunk of it would go back to the record company.
I guess. I know a lot of artists are unhappy with
streaming.
Their money, with the money they're getting for a million plays and stuff,
Yeah.
But I've kind of lost touch with the recording industry, as with the big record companies and all of that, because most of my work are repeat customers who are singer-songwriters that they want to get their stuff up on YouTube and stuff like that, and they come to me to do all their music and record that stuff for them. But I don't get calls from record companies saying, "Well, come over and produce a record on so and so."
Yeah.
You know, it just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you would have noticed a massive decline in high-end studios as well, because I guess it's now most you can actually record in a bedroom with a laptop.
Yeah, I mean, it's that simple. I mean, if you've got a computer, you've got a recording studio.
Of course, you can't record a 15-piece band in your bedroom.
That's true.
Which was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun when you've had like a 10-piece horn section makes a pretty big sound.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was a lot of fun the other night. One of my main reasons for doing this podcast is to try and help young players navigate a career in the industry, playing music. What would you say for a young teenage guitar player or a keyboard player or any musician who said, I'd really like to make a career out of playing music? Mm-hmm. What one thing would you say would be a good piece of advice?
Well, if ultimately you wanted to be, say, a session musician, you would have to go to a city that has that industry, like LA or New York or Nashville. And there's a few other places, I guess, Memphis and all that. And outside of that, just try to learn as much as you can and be as versatile as you can, and wherever you're at, there's always going to be someone recording. Radio stations, they have to have jingles. There's little film companies all around. There's that kind of work. There's the club work, and so you gotta spread it out anymore. You can't just do one thing. Yeah, but the most important thing is to, if you get the opportunity to play on something, make sure that you're prepared for it. That you don't want to go in before you're ready for something and then you won't get called again.
Yeah.
But there's so many great players out there these days,
Guys like talk about Aaron West, who is a local muso here. What a talent.
He deserves to have had hit records. He's such a great singer, such a great musician.
Guitar player, keyboard player, bass player, drummer.
Yes, yeah.
But his guitar playing is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But it's that
But
thing.
he gets a lot of work too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he gets plenty of work.
So there's plenty of work out there. Is plenty of work out there for people with the skills, with the talent. I guess that's that thing of just work on your skills, work on your talent, and everything else will fall into place.
Yeah. Fortunately, people still like to go out and hear music, live music.
Because I know you're still out doing gigs.
Huh?
You're still out doing gigs?
Oh, yeah.
You're enjoying playing live?
I have to. I mean, to keep my chops up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is one of those things. If you're not playing constantly, it is a... I notice it's one of those things.
If nothing else, you lose your calluses,
Yes. Yeah.
Let alone your dexterity,
As a player in America, particularly back from when you came from, there was a big unionised system, and you paid into a union, and they look after... But you get union checks now, don't you?
Yes.
Which we don't. It's something that doesn't happen here in Australia.
And it didn't happen any place in America either, other than maybe New York and Nashville. But the LA Musicians Union is fantastic. And everything I played on during my session career, and mostly was recorded as a phonograph record. But I played on so many hits that get used for movies and commercials and other things. And every time it's used, they have to pay all of us musicians again for that, because it was we were only paid for a phonograph record. Now, when it goes to something else, and so they keep track of all of that. There's certain rules where you have to have a 10-minute break on every hour, and you're paid for a certain amount of time, and they can't keep you there for 2 more hours. If they do, they got to pay more. So they're good in that regard. But as far as keeping track of all your film work and all that kind of stuff that we did, and also there was a musicians trust fund that we paid into.
Oh, okay.
Which we get now, that I'm not doing that anymore, you know.
Okay.
So they were absolutely fantastic. One of the reasons for that is a lot of the session players, as they kind of got older and quit doing sessions, they became executives at the Musicians Union. So they knew what to look out for, you know.
Yeah.
So that they couldn't put some song that you've played on in a movie and not pay you for it. They said, no, you got to pay them.
Really, that's a really wonderful thing to have happened.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in and listening, and we'll hopefully see you on the next one. Thank you very much, Louie.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.